In Hollywood's golden age, the biggest scandals didn't always make the headlines. Some were buried in courtrooms, paid for with silence and shattered dreams. What happens when the glamour hides a darker price? Tonight, we peel back the legal battles that studios tried to erase. Who truly held the power in old Hollywood, and who paid the price in secret? Stay with us, because the stories that never made it to the screen are the ones that linger longest in the shadows. 1. Olivia De Havland vs. Warner Brothers, 1943 to 1945. In the golden corridors of Hollywood, contracts were once written as shackles, and few wore them as tightly as Olivia De Havland. A box office darling and a force of quiet defiance, De Havland's war wasn't just waged on screen, but in the courts, against the system itself. Warner Brothers had bound her in a 7-year contract, but the studio's service loophole extended those years with suspensions for every refusal or hesitation. It was a stranglehold disguised as a business agreement. Olivia, weary of the repetitive roles and relentless control, finally reached her breaking point. In 1943, she sued Warner Brothers, daring to challenge the very machinery that powered Hollywood's golden age. The studio fought back viciously. Gossip columnists whispered that Olivia was ungrateful, difficult, and disloyal. Executives warned her career would be over, but De Havland stood her ground, turning her legal battle into a crusade for creative freedom. Her lawsuit argued that California labor law forbade contracts of more than 7 years from the original signing date, no matter how many times a studio tried to add months as punishment. The battle went to the California Court of Appeals, where the verdict changed Hollywood forever. In 1945, the court ruled in her favor. Suddenly, the De Havland law stripped studios of their ability to imprison stars in endless contracts. The ripple effect was seismic. For the first time, actors could negotiate, refuse roles, and demand better treatment without risking career execution. Olivia's victory didn't just win her freedom, it upended the power dynamic of classic Hollywood, forcing studios to treat their stars as artists, not property. The industry would never operate the same way again. For decades to come, actors across America would owe their agency, quite literally, to the courage of Olivia De Havland. 2nd, Bette Davis vs. Warner Brothers. 1936 to 1937. Bette Davis, with her electric eyes and razor wit, was never one to play the ingenue, on screen or off. By the mid-1930s, she was Warner Brothers. Most bankable actress, yet her career was suffocating under the weight of mediocrity. The studio forced her into films she considered beneath her talent, threatened suspension, and controlled her every move. Davis, proud and uncompromising, reached her limit after a string of lackluster scripts and relentless work schedules. In 1936, she did the unthinkable. She fled Hollywood to England and sued Warner Brothers in a British court, seeking to break free from her ironclad contract. The legal drama played out like a Hollywood epic. Headlines screamed about the actress who bit the hand that fed her. Warner Brothers retaliated, hiring top barristers and wielding the threat of career obliteration. The studio's lawyers argued that Davis had no right to refuse roles, regardless of their quality, and insisted the contract was absolute. Bette, meanwhile, argued for the dignity of an artist, her right to choose work worthy of her skill, and to be treated as more than just a replaceable commodity. Davis ultimately lost the court case. The British judge, bound by the letter of the law and not its spirit, sided with Warner Brothers, but the trial sent shockwaves through the industry. The public saw for the first time just how brutally studios could exploit their stars, and the sympathy Davis garnered made her a symbol of Hollywood's creative resistance. Warner Brothers, unwilling to lose their brightest star, eventually caved, offering her better roles and more respect. Bette's defeat in court became a moral victory, inspiring other actors to question the system and making her, in the eyes of fans and fellow performers, a true Hollywood rebel. 3. Judy Garland versus MGM, multiple lawsuits, 1940s to 1950s. Judy Garland's life was as dramatic as any role she ever played, perhaps more so. From the moment she signed with MGM as a child, she became both the studio's darling and its victim. MGM's recipe for Judy's stardom was grueling: endless hours on set, relentless public appearances, and a strict diet of amphetamines to keep her thin and barbiturates to force her to sleep. Garland's days blurred into nights, and her teenage years vanished beneath makeup and stage lights. By the 1940s, the signs of abuse were showing: mental breakdowns, physical exhaustion, and a desperate longing for autonomy. Judy's legal battles with MGM weren't about contract loopholes, they were about survival. She fought back against the studio's tyranny in fits and starts, at first begging for less punishing schedules, then demanding release from her contract entirely. In 1950, after collapsing on set, Garland was suspended, publicly humiliated, and replaced in a major film. But Judy didn't just fade away. She sued MGM, alleging wrongful termination and public defamation, arguing that their abuse and impossible standards had destroyed her health and reputation. The lawsuits didn't always go in her favor, and the legal skirmishes were complicated by Judy's own struggles. But with every battle, she exposed the cost of Hollywood's golden illusion, the lives ground down behind the scenes, the humanity lost in the name of show business. Garland's story forced the world to confront the darkness beneath MGM's Technicolor dreams. Though she never truly escaped the scars of her early career, her bravery in taking on the studio, both in court and in the press, opened the door for future stars to demand humane treatment. Judy Garland's fight wasn't just for herself, it was for every artist caught in Hollywood's machine. Fourth, Jackie Kugan versus his mother and stepfather, 1938. Jackie Kugan was one of Hollywood's first true child stars, charming millions in silent classics like The Kid. But Kugan's story took a nightmarish turn once the cameras stopped rolling. As a teenager, he discovered that the fortune he'd earned, estimated in the millions, had been squandered by his own mother and stepfather. They spent his money on lavish homes, cars, and their own pleasure, leaving Jackie penniless and betrayed. When he confronted them, they chillingly told him, "No promises were ever made to you." Kugan did what no child star had ever done before. He took his own family to court. The lawsuit gripped the nation, with headlines painting Kugan as both tragic and courageous. The trial exposed the utter lack of protection for child actors in Hollywood, where studios paid parents and guardians directly, and children had no legal right to their earnings. The judge ruled in Jackie's favor, but by then most of the money was gone. The real impact of Kugan's lawsuit came in its aftermath. Outrage over his case spurred the California legislature to pass the Kugan Law, requiring that a portion of all child performers' earnings be set aside in trust for them until adulthood. The law didn't give Jackie back his millions, but it changed Hollywood forever, protecting generations of child stars from the same fate. Jackie Kugan's heartbreaking lawsuit turned his personal tragedy into a legacy of reform, and his name is still invoked whenever the rights of child actors are at stake. 5. Shirley Temple's legal battles, 1940s to 1950s. No child embodied innocence and joy like Shirley Temple, but her journey through Hollywood was anything but simple. As a child superstar in the 1930s, she generated enormous profits for studios and managers, yet when she reached adulthood, she found that her fortune had been nibbled away by bad deals and greedy hands. Temple's mother, her supposed protector, signed contracts that surrendered rights to her image, residuals, and even her voice for pennies on the dollar. By the time Shirley could advocate for herself, much of her early work's value had been siphoned off. Temple's response was methodical and public. She sued studios, former agents, and even her own family to reclaim the rights and money that had been promised to her. Unlike many child stars, Shirley was sharp, determined, and unafraid to use the legal system to get justice. She took on Fox, RKO, and other studios, fighting for residuals and a fair share of re-release profits. Temple's legal crusades weren't always about the money. They were about respect, legacy, and the principle that no one, not even Hollywood royalty, should be exploited. While some settlements were quiet and some cases dragged for years, Shirley Temple's tenacity made headlines and forced the industry to re-examine how it treated its youngest, most vulnerable talents. Her lawsuits, combined with public advocacy, helped ensure that future child stars had the right to legal representation and proper accounting of their work. By standing up for herself, Shirley Temple did more than defend her childhood. She helped change the rules of the industry that made her famous. 6. Rita Hworth versus Columbia. Pictures, 1955. Rita Hayworth's image was the stuff of legend, seductive, glamorous, and carefully manufactured by Columbia Pictures. Yet, behind the smokescreen of stardom was a woman battling for autonomy over her own life. Hayworth's fame came at a steep price: grueling work schedules, invasive studio publicity, and a constant demand to fit a persona that wasn't truly hers. As the love goddess, she was expected to be the studio's most bankable asset. But by the mid-1950s, Hayworth's personal life had unraveled, and she found herself at war with the very system that built her. The conflict reached a breaking point when Columbia tried to exploit Hayworth's private struggles for publicity and refused her repeated pleas for time off. In 1955, Hworth sued the studio to prevent the release of films and photos that traded on her vulnerability and personal crises. The suit was not just about money, it was about control and respect. Hworth argued that Columbia had crossed a line, turning her pain into profit, ignoring her well-being, and violating her privacy. The lawsuit was a bombshell. For the first time, the public saw just how far studios would go to protect their bottom line, even if it meant destroying the star they depended on. The case forced Columbia to back down, setting a precedent that studios could no longer treat their stars' personal lives as fair game. Hayworth's victory was bittersweet. While she reclaimed some dignity, the scars of exploitation lingered for the rest of her life. Her battle became a cautionary tale, a reminder that in classic Hollywood, the line between fame and abuse was often razor thin. 7. Jean Harlo versus MGM 1930s. Jean Harlo was the original blonde bombshell, a box office sensation whose allure was as powerful off-screen as on. But beneath the platinum hair and dazzling smile, Harlo was waging her own private war with MGM. The studio's contract kept her chained to exhausting shooting schedules and roles that often reduced her to a caricature. Worse, her compensation lagged far behind that of her male co-stars, despite her films earning millions. The studio expected total obedience, enforcing suspensions for any hint of rebellion. Harlo's turning point came when she realized just how deeply the exploitation ran. She was suffering physically from the demands, emotionally from the lack of creative input, and financially from an unfair contract. In the early 1930s, Harlo took MGM to court, seeking a renegotiation of her contract and fairer compensation. The lawsuit shocked the industry. Few women dared to challenge a studio, let alone overpay inequality. Though MGM fought back, fearing a wave of similar demands from other stars, Harlo's determination paid off. The settlement wasn't publicized, but insiders knew she won concessions: better pay, more rest, and greater say over her roles. Harlo's fight became a quiet revolution, inspiring other actresses to push for equity and autonomy. Her lawsuit chipped away at Hollywood's double standards, laying the groundwork for the battles over gender and respect that would follow for decades. Jean Harlo's courage was ahead of its time, echoing through every contract negotiation that came after her. 8. Kim Novak versus Columbia, Pictures, 1950s. Kim Novak's rise in the 1950s was meteoric, an outsider who became one of Hollywood's most enigmatic leading ladies. Yet that very mystique made her a target for Columbia Pictures and its notorious head, Harry Cohn. Cohn believed Novak's image belonged to the studio, and he wielded her contract like a weapon. Novak was pressured to accept roles that didn't suit her, to undergo image makeovers, and even to manipulate her private life for publicity's sake. The control was suffocating, the pressure relentless. Novak's refusal to play along led to open warfare. When she declined roles she found demeaning, Cohn threatened suspension and blacklisting. Novak didn't back down. She brought her grievances to court, fighting for creative control and the right to her own image. The suit became a Hollywood scandal, splashed across trade papers and gossip columns. Audiences sympathized with Novak's plight. She represented every artist crushed by the studio machine. The legal battle was grueling, but Novak ultimately secured her independence. She won more freedom over her roles and a new contract less weighted by Cohn's whims. Novak's stand made her a beacon for other stars who longed to break free from their own golden cages. Her case showed that even the most powerful studios could be challenged, and sometimes the price of artistic integrity was worth the fight. For Kim Novak, the lawsuit wasn't just about roles or money, it was about claiming the right to be herself. 9. Loretta Young versus 20th Century Fox, 1944. Loretta Young was a consummate professional, graceful, disciplined, and beloved by audiences. But Hollywood's respect for her ended where studio contracts began. In the early 1940s, 20th Century Fox tried to force Young into roles she considered morally and artistically unacceptable. When she resisted, the studio retaliated: suspensions, threats, and the ever-present specter of blacklisting. For Young, the line was clear: she refused to be exploited, no matter the cost to her career. In 1944, Young sued the studio, challenging the abusive power they held over her choices. She argued that forcing her to play roles against her conscience violated not just her contract, but her dignity as an artist and a person. The lawsuit thrust her into the spotlight, with newspapers casting her as either a diva or a martyr. But Young held fast, using her faith and public support as armor against the studio's attacks. The court battle didn't yield a perfect victory. Young had to settle, and the terms were not widely publicized. But her resistance sent a signal throughout Hollywood. Stars were no longer willing to be bullied into submission. Loretta Young's stand helped tip the balance, inspiring other actors to demand respect, creative input, and humane treatment. In the end, she proved that personal integrity could be more valuable than any studio's promise of fame. 10. Joan Crawford versus Warner Brothers. 1950s. Joan Crawford was Hollywood's iron-willed survivor, her face a mask of glamour, her spirit forged by struggle. But even she was not immune to the industry's harshest tactics. By the 1950s, after decades of hits and reinventions, Crawford's relationship with Warner Brothers turned toxic. The studio, displeased with her growing independence, abruptly terminated her contract. Worse, executives spread damaging rumors, implying that Crawford was difficult, unreliable, and past her prime. The goal was clear: to blacklist her and destroy her market value elsewhere. Crawford fought back with the ferocity that made her a legend. She sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract and slander, demanding not just financial compensation, but a public reckoning for the studio's dirty tricks. The lawsuit peeled back the layers of Hollywood politicking, exposing how studios manipulated reputations and careers to maintain control. Though the legal battle was draining, Crawford scored a partial victory. The studio settled, and Crawford was able to rehabilitate her image and continue working, proving that even Hollywood's most ruthless machinery could be forced to account for its actions. Crawford's fight served as a warning to studios. The days of unchecked abuse were ending, and stars were ready to reclaim their power. Her lawsuit became part of her legacy, a story of survival, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes. 11th Elizabeth Taylor versus MGM, 1960s. Elizabeth Taylor was more than just a star. She was an industry unto herself. But in the 1960s, the very studio that had helped sculpt her career, MGM, became her adversary in a bitter legal struggle. Taylor was under immense pressure, both publicly and privately, to maintain a grueling work schedule and project an image of perfection. MGM viewed her not as a person, but as a commodity, demanding she accept roles regardless of her health or artistic interest. The studio's relentless pursuit of profit left Taylor exhausted and increasingly resentful. When Taylor resisted, MGM retaliated with threats of suspension and legal action. The breaking point came during the filming of Cleopatra, where production delays, illness, and an endless parade of tabloid scandals pushed Taylor to her limits. She sued the studio for breaching contract terms, claiming that MGM's demands endangered her well-being and disregarded prior agreements over compensation and choice of projects. The legal battle was fierce, with MGM painting Taylor as temperamental and unreliable, while Taylor's camp exposed the studio's harsh labor practices and disregard for its stars. Ultimately, the conflict forced MGM to back down, setting a new precedent for how major stars could negotiate their roles and working conditions. Taylor's victory wasn't just personal. It was symbolic, a signal that the era of absolute studio power was drawing to a close. Her case inspired other stars to challenge abusive studio contracts and demand respect for their artistic integrity. Elizabeth Taylor proved that even in Hollywood's most turbulent times, a star could still fight for and win her independence. 12th, Mickey Rooney versus MGM, 1940s to 1950s. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood's golden boy, a child actor whose boundless energy made him a fixture on screens throughout the 1930s and 40s. But behind the cheerful persona was a young man who, like so many before him, fell victim to the industry's exploitation. By the time Rooney reached adulthood, he discovered that the fortune he'd earned was largely gone, siphoned off by mismanagement and studio manipulation. MGM had profited enormously from Rooney's work, but left him with little real control over his earnings or career. Frustrated and betrayed, Rooney took legal action against MGM, demanding compensation for unpaid wages and residuals. He argued that the studio's accounting practices were opaque at best and deliberately exploitative at worst. The lawsuit made headlines, with Rooney publicly denouncing the money men who controlled the destinies of Hollywood's brightest stars. His fight shone a light on the broader issue of financial exploitation in the industry. Although Rooney's legal victories were mixed, the publicity surrounding his case helped raise awareness and drive industry-wide changes. Studios became more accountable, and child actors gradually won greater protections over their finances and careers. Mickey Rooney's lawsuit was a turning point, showing that even the most beloved star could be chewed up and spit out by Hollywood, but also that the fight for justice, no matter how belated, could help change the system for those who came after. 13. Merl Oberon versus Alexander Korda/London Films, 1940s. Merl Oberon's ethereal beauty and magnetic screen presence masked a career defined by struggle and self-preservation. Working under producer Alexander Korda at London Films, Oberon faced relentless exploitation. Her contracts required her to work brutal hours, sometimes in unsafe conditions that jeopardized her health. When she objected, the studio doubled down, threatening suspension, replacing her in projects, and spreading rumors about her difficult reputation to undermine her standing in the industry. Oberon's lawsuit was a bold act in an era when stars rarely took on powerful producers. She argued that her contract's demands were not only unfair, but also endangered her health and violated basic standards of decency. The suit brought to light the punishing schedules and lack of regard for performers' well-being that were routine in classic Hollywood and British cinema alike. Though the legal battle was bitter, Oberon's efforts paid off. She secured a new agreement that granted her more reasonable working hours, better pay, and a measure of creative input. Her stand also helped embolden other actresses to resist exploitation and demand humane treatment. For Merl Oberon, the lawsuit was not just about her own career. It was about drawing a line in the sand, insisting that no performer should have to sacrifice their health or dignity for a role. Her courage resonated throughout the industry, making her a quiet but crucial figure in the fight for artists' rights. 14. Myrna Loy versus MGM, 1940s. Myrna Loy, often dubbed the Queen of Hollywood, was admired for her poise and intellect both on and off the screen. Yet even she was not immune to the machinery of studio control. In the 1940s, MGM suspended Loy multiple times for refusing roles she found unworthy or demeaning. The studio's tactic was classic: enforce obedience through financial penalties and professional isolation. Loy, however, refused to accept that her artistry could be dictated by contract alone. Her lawsuit against MGM challenged the practice of suspension stacking, the studio's method of extending contracts by adding time for every refusal or suspension. Loy argued that this not only violated California labor law, but also constituted a form of professional exploitation. The case captured the attention of the industry, as Loy was one of its most respected figures, and her willingness to stand up to MGM set an example for countless others. Though the outcome was kept mostly private, insiders knew Loy's action led to fairer negotiations and a better working relationship. Her legal battle contributed to the erosion of the old studio system and empowered other stars to seek similar redress. For Myrna Loy, the lawsuit was more than a personal fight. It was part of a broader movement toward respect and self-determination in Hollywood. She remains a symbol of dignity and quiet strength in the face of systemic abuse. 15. Marilyn Monroe versus 20th Century Fox, 1954 to 1955. Few stories from classic Hollywood are as iconic as Marilyn Monroe's struggle for respect in a system built to exploit. By the mid-1950s, Monroe was a global sensation, yet 20th Century Fox still saw her as just another contract player, typecast in dumb blonde roles, and denied any say in her career. Monroe's frustrations boiled over when the studio assigned her to yet another frivolous musical, ignoring her pleas for more serious, challenging parts. The fight quickly turned public. Monroe took a stand, refusing to show up for work, and then filing suit against the studio to break her contract. Her case became front-page news, a superstar risking everything to assert her artistic autonomy. Fox, eager to make an example of her, suspended Monroe and spread rumors that she was unstable and ungrateful. But Marilyn refused to be silenced, launching a parallel campaign in the press and gaining support from fans and industry allies alike. In the end, Monroe forced the studio's hand. Fox capitulated, offering her a new contract with more creative input, higher pay, and the opportunity to choose her own projects, starting with Bus Stop, which earned her critical acclaim. Marilyn's lawsuit wasn't just about one role or one studio. It was about every woman who'd been told she was only as valuable as her looks. Her victory helped pave the way for generations of actresses demanding respect and artistic control, proving that even in Hollywood, courage could rewrite the script. 16. Frances Farmer versus Paramount. Frances Farmer was one of the most talented and enigmatic actresses of her era, a star whose artistry shone bright before being crushed by a system that refused to tolerate independence. Farmer's battles with Paramount Studios were notorious. She challenged the studio's authority, refusing to accept roles she considered beneath her dignity or irrelevant to her career ambitions. Paramount responded with suspensions, public smears, and ultimately, total professional isolation. When Farmer tried to break free, the studio retaliated not only with legal threats, but also by leveraging its power to paint her as unstable. These tensions culminated in Farmer's forced institutionalization, an episode that remains one of the most harrowing chapters in Hollywood history. Though she did not win in court, Farmer's efforts and subsequent legal actions, supported by her mother and advocates, laid bare the extreme measures studios could take to punish difficult women. Her ordeal, covered by the press and later dramatized on film, became a symbol of Hollywood's darkest abuses of power. While Frances Farmer's life ended in obscurity, her struggle reverberates through every legal and creative battle waged by artists for autonomy. Her case is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked studio control and the human cost of an industry built on exploitation. 17th, Deanna Durban versus Universal. Deanna Durban's clear voice and wholesome screen persona rescued Universal Studios from bankruptcy in the late 1930s. But behind the studio's triumph was a young woman desperate for freedom. As Durban matured, she craved more challenging roles and creative input, but Universal refused to let her grow. Locked into a contract that dictated not only her professional life, but also her public image, Durban found herself suffocating under the weight of her own stardom. Determined to take control, Durban sued Universal to escape her contract, arguing that the studio's refusal to let her evolve artistically amounted to personal and professional exploitation. The lawsuit marked a rare instance of a major star risking everything for a chance at self-determination. Though the case was eventually settled quietly, Durban agreed to finish a final few pictures before retiring at just 27. The impact was enormous. Her actions challenged the notion that studios could treat their stars as permanent children, forced to repeat the same roles indefinitely. Durban's departure left a hole in Universal's slate and proved that even the most profitable stars could rebel. Her case inspired later generations to seek more creative freedom, and she is remembered today as a pioneer who quietly but resolutely broke Hollywood's golden chains. 18. Peg Entwistle's estate versus RKO 1932, posthumous. Peg Entwistle's story is one of Hollywood's most haunting tragedies. After a brief but promising career, Entwistle took her own life by leaping from the H of the Hollywood sign in 1932. In the aftermath, RKO Studios sought to capitalize on her notoriety, using her death as a promotional tool for her final film without her family's permission. The spectacle was both grotesque and deeply exploitative. Entwistle's family, devastated by the loss and horrified by the studio's actions, filed legal claims against RKO. They argued that the unauthorized use of her name, image, and personal tragedy for profit constituted a violation of her rights and basic decency. The case drew public attention to the issue of posthumous exploitation, a practice all too common in an era with few protections for performers or their estates. Though legal protections would take years to evolve, Peg Entwistle's case was one of the first to highlight the ethical responsibilities of studios regarding a star's legacy. Her story stands as a somber warning. In Hollywood, even death was not enough to shield one from exploitation. 19th, Ida Lupino versus Studio System Spotlight. Ida Lupino was a true trailblazer, one of the first women to direct films in Hollywood, but her journey was littered with obstacles placed by a male-dominated system. As an actress and director, Lupino faced studio interference, pay inequality, and attempts to sideline her directorial ambitions. On more than one occasion, she was forced to threaten legal action to secure her rights to direct, produce, and maintain creative control over her projects. Lupino's battles weren't always fought in public courtrooms, but in contract negotiations and private legal disputes that forced studios to recognize her contributions. By consistently standing up for her rights, she helped pave the way for future female filmmakers. Her tenacity and willingness to use the legal system as leverage made her a quiet revolutionary, a woman who refused to be pigeonholed by Hollywood's narrow expectations. Ida Lupino's legacy is one of courage and resilience, a reminder that the fight for creative freedom in Hollywood was not just about stars, but about every artist determined to shape their own destiny. 20. Dorothy Dandridge vs. Racial Exploitation in Contract Spotlight. Dorothy Dandridge, the first African-American actress nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, confronted not only the personal demands of stardom, but also the ugly realities of systemic racism. Studios routinely relegated her to stereotypical roles, paid her less than white co-stars, and excluded her from many opportunities available to others. Dandridge, refusing to accept this status quo, challenged discriminatory clauses in her contracts and threatened legal action against producers who tried to exploit her talent without fair compensation. Her legal battles were as much about civil rights as they were about personal justice. Dandridge's willingness to fight for her rights and to walk away from demeaning offers helped open doors for future generations of performers of color. While Hollywood's progress was slow, her courage forced studios to confront their prejudices and reconsider how they treated non-white talent. Dorothy Dandridge's legacy is one of determination and pride. Her legal and personal battles remain a crucial chapter in the long fight against exploitation, proof that even in the most glamorous of industries, justice and respect must be demanded, not merely hoped for. Behind the shimmering facades and silver screens, Hollywood's legends were often fighting for something far more precious than fame, their freedom, dignity, and truth. Each courtroom battle chipped away at a system built on secrecy and control, rewriting the rules for generations to come. The stars who stood up, even when the odds were impossible, turned their pain into progress. Their courage still echoes, reminding us that justice in Hollywood, like everywhere else, is always hard-won and never guaranteed.